So in this video, I'm going to show you how to make the desk tidy project from start to finish. And the first thing we want to do is to cut down a paper template to size. So I'm going to line up the metal with the corner of a piece of A4 paper, and then I'll get a pencil. And I'm going to carefully draw along the metal and along the top. And that shows our size of metal. So I'm just going to grab some scissors and carefully cut around the edge to get the bit of paper to size. And now you've got the bit of paper to size to the same size as your metal. Just put it over the top, you can see. Now it's time to draw the design. So for my design, I want to do a symmetrical type pattern. So I'm going to draw two lines from corner to corner to get a middle point. This is a really nice, accurate way to get a middle point on your piece of metal. And I'm also going to do a vertical line just where they join. Obviously this will be completely different to your design, but my design, I need a few geometric measurements. So with a big pen, I'm now going to mark in where my drill holes are going to be. So for my design, I try and get them exactly to the right spacing. So now I want to stick the template to the metal. So I'm going to grab some masking tape and I'm just going to carefully wrap it around the sides just to hold it in place. I would normally suggest doing each corner. And you can see there it's now taped on. And we can transfer this now onto the metal using a hammer and center punch. So we carefully line it up with our mark, and with one solid blow we are basically creating an indent into your metal where your marks are. Take your time doing this, because once you've hit it, it will be in that position. You can't really change it after this. And now I've done all the dots, I'm going to unstick the masking tape and I can show you the marks underneath. And those are really nice guide divots for the drill when we come to drill it. So wearing your PPE and lining up the drill with the first hole, I'm going to clamp it down, making sure the clamps are pushed all the way down nice and flat. And then carefully bringing the drill down, drilling the first hole. And then it's just a case of lining up your next hole and step and repeat. Obviously, please be careful, because the drill actually leaves a sharp burr on the metal which can cut you. So just be extra careful when handling your metal after drilling. You don't want to break the drill bit, so you don't want to add too much pressure, just enough to cut the metal. But you don't want to do it too lightly, so you cause a lot of heat, because that can cause the metal to harden. That's all the holes done. So like I said, there's sharp burrs on this piece, and it's normally on the rear side, as you can see there. So it's our job to get a file and carefully file these down. By putting it flat on the worktop is probably best for this. If you struggle, you can hold it like this. And it should be relatively easy to knock those burrs off. So now all the burrs are off. You can see the finish of the metal is not actually very nice. It's still how it would come out of the factory. So we're going to use some emery cloth, and you want to go in one direction, left to right, to basically clean up the metal. And if you go in one direction like this, you'll get a really nice brushed steel finish. So it's looking a lot better now. And that's the other side. So I would still do the other side a little bit, but normally that would be the inside of your pot. So I would suggest spending more time on the outside. Now we can use some wet and dry paper. This is basically an abrasive paper like sandpaper that can be used wet or dry. But if you use it dry, it'll also clean it up a lot nicer. It'll get away the big grooves from the emery cloth and make it even more pristine. So now we're going to go to the metal roller. So the metal roller is going to move it to bend it basically into our curved pattern. So to set it, we want that dial to be halfway down. And you want the show surface, so the outside surface, to be facing down. So we put it in, and you want it to sit nice and straight to the rollers. You don't want it like this or like this. If you do it that way, it'll turn into a spring. You want to do it nice and flat. So when it's all in place, you can turn it round, and that's going through really nicely. But at the moment, it's not bending it, so we need to adjust it up 1 millimeter. And we do both sides on the little gauge. There's one on each side. And now you can see that it's starting to bend. So what I do is the end that just came out, we actually put that in first this time and go again. After you've done that, we can adjust it up 1 millimeter again on the gauge. Remember, both sides. And now we go again. So goes through one way, flip it around so the other part is going in first. And when it's out again, we adjust it 1 more millimeter. And again. And you can see the more we're doing it, the more we're going to get into that completed circle shape. And we're getting quite close now. So always checking that the guide is set to the same measurement on each side. And we're getting very, very close now. I think this should be the last one, up 1 millimeter. So now it's joining around, so I bend it a little bit, just so I can get it out. You pull it out, and it should be nice and circular. And there should be a little overlap, about a centimeter, centimeter and a half. And that's going to work. So now we go over to the spot welder. We're going to actually weld these two sides together. So you carefully hold it together, making sure it's nice and straight. Push down on the spot welder. And now it's made a really nice solid weld on one end. We now need one in the middle. So I'm going to make sure it's nice and straight and place one down there. And then we're just going to do one last one on this end to make sure it's super secure. And there is 3 spot welds. It's going to be really hot, so without your gloves on, make sure you don't touch the side with the welds. Now it's time to make the base. So we get our plywood, which we're going to use for our base, and we place our metal on top. Then we get a sharp pencil or a mechanical pencil to draw around the inside edge, and you want to make sure you're really nice and tight to that inside edge of the metal. And we lift off. And ideally, where the join is with the welds, you want to put an arrow where that was when you drew around your piece, just because it'll make it line up really nicely later on and it will actually fit. The next job is carefully putting it in a vise, and we're going to roughly cut this out with a coping saw. Making sure when we cut this, we don't actually want to cut up to the line. We're actually going to be away from the line by a couple of millimeters, which you'll see here. So you can see I'm leaving about a millimeter or 2 just away from the line. That's because we can be really accurate with a belt sander afterwards. I got very close to the line there, which ideally you shouldn't do. All the way around. Take your time with this, because it will take some time with the coping saw. Just be gentle and you won't break any blades. And as you can see here, you should line up right with the saw cut, and it should pop out. And you can see there, you've still got the circle in pencil with the rough cut around it. Now we step over to the belt sander, and wearing our PPE and making sure we're nice and safe, we are going to get closer to your line. You still want to be able to see your pencil line when you do this, because in a minute we're going to test it without taking too much off. So you can see there we've still got the pencil line. And now we can line up our base to our metal, and you can still see that's not going to fit in. It'd be too much of a squeeze and the wood would break. So we're going now with a belt sander to take a little bit more off directly up to the line. You don't want to sand too much off, otherwise the base will not fit into your pot. So now we're going to try it again. So you can see where our arrow is. We're going to line that up with the welded seam. You can see it just squeezes in. And by tapping it on the table, it'll go further into the pot. And alternatively, you can get one of our wood mallets and just tap it in nice and flush with the end, nice and gently. That base is really solid in there now. That's not going to move or shake out. The friction fit is nice and tight. No adhesive is needed for that. And now, because we've handled the metal, we want to tidy it up a little bit more. So the final process of tidying it would be using Scotch-Brite. It comes in a few different colours. This one's green, but sometimes it can come into reds and browns. And what this is doing is putting a really nice, fine buffed edge on it. It'll clean off any fingerprints. It'll get rid of some of the bigger marks maybe used by the files or the emery cloths. And this will get it nice and ready for spraying and masking up. So now we're going to mask our pattern. We don't want to spray the whole paint, the whole pot, just because it can use up too much spray paint, which we don't have. And two, it can make it nicer if you work a spot where you are going to add some paint to. So I'm carefully putting masking tape where in my head the design is going to lie. You want to make sure that you push the masking tape all the way down and it sits really nice and flat to your metal. You don't want there to be any gaps between the metal and the masking tape, because the paint can actually seep underneath it and it won't look very good. So I've masked off these 4 triangle shapes. And I'm quite happy with that. So now we go over to the spray booth. And after I've picked the colour that I want and I've shaken it for about 30 seconds to a minute, I'm going to keep the can about 30 centimetres away. And then I'm doing intermittent sprays side to side. As you can see, you want it to be a really light coating of paint. Any thick paint will cause a drip and it won't look good. So you can see there I've got my base colour down, and I want a little gradient between like the purple and this greeny turquoise. So I've got the purple paint now, and I'm going to add that to where I want it to be. Remember, short little bursts left to right, not holding the finger down all the time, just short bursts. So when you've painted it all, obviously in your classes you'll be putting it on the side to dry, but for this example I actually took the masking tape off when it was wet. So I'm being extra careful with making sure I do not touch the painted areas with my fingers or with bits of old tape. It'll be a lot easier when it is dry. And this is where you see your design come to life. Okay, so that's how it should look, and I'm going to let that properly dry now. So now it's dry, we can do the lacing part. So all the holes that we've drilled are for the laces to go in and out of, a bit like a stitch. So what I do is a nice double knot on one end first. This is the way I personally do it, but I know some students do this a little bit differently. And I take the other end and I'm going to go through the hole that I want to go through first and pull through. And then down through the next hole and put it nice and tight. And then up through the next hole and back down through the hole that we went through. It's like a running back stitch. Take your time with this, and it's what I would say is it would give you a better finish if you make sure it's nice and tight as you go along, because sometimes if it's too loose you can get these big loops which don't look very good. And through the other hole and back down. So as you can see here, it's now nicely finished and we're left with one big nice lace coming out. Now we want to tie this together. So I find my first bit of lace, first end, the end that I was left with, and I'm just tying a little double knot. I would say this is the most fiddly bit throughout all of it, but a nice double knot and cutting the excess off will make it look really nice. And this is your finished desk tidy.